Good morning. Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live in my bathrobe from warm, sunny Colorado. It is currently Saturday, 6 a.m. Well, 6:35 a.m., give or take. I got my coffee with my Broncos mug. How about that? I don't watch the Broncos anymore, but I kept the mug. Anyway, the news of the hour, as I was scrolling through all my messages, is that Ripple has responded to the SEC lawsuit. And actually, something is really fun. I, for the first time in my career, have been mentioned in a FOIA request. I guess I've reached that level of prominence where you have to request government records on me. So I wanted to do a screen share and go through the 93-page response from Ripple. Let's do that together, huh? Okay. Okay. So if you guys can see my screen, this is the CoinDesk article, which has a link to the entire 93-page response that Ripple gave. Most of it's boilerplate. They're kind of going through all the claims about the Howey analysis, but there's a few interesting gems in here, and I figured I'd bring them up, and they're really interesting. Let me see here. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't put on my glasses, so a little hard to see. Paragraph 4 is really unique. It says, the last part of it, in bringing a case that alleges an unregistered offering of just 1.3 billion, or just over 1.3 billion from at least 2013, the SEC has already caused more than an estimated $15 billion in damages to those it purports to protect. That's a really powerful statement. And it reminds me of a bit of a movie that came out over 10 years ago from the creators of South Park, which was Team America. And as they were going about trying to kill these terrorists, they ended up destroying Paris and causing all this chicanery and havoc. And it does bring up an interesting point that sometimes enforcement actions can have the unintended, or in some cases, intended consequence of causing an enormous amount of harm to those purported to be protected. And in this case, it's measured by a magnitude of a factor of 10. So for whatever damages were caused, allegedly or otherwise, by the offering, 15 billion in damages to the market, alongside a loss of liquidity and so forth. Now, another thing that they mention inside the complaint, the counter complaint, is that they were talking about, well, hang on a second here, in paragraph 6 and 7 and these others, they kind of go into the design of Ripple, and they mention the fact that the ledger has been running for almost 10 years, and it's processed billions of dollars worth of transactions, and that the ledger runs independently of the Ripple organization. So let's say, for the sake of the argument, that this lawsuit is successful and that the SEC says, okay, you guys are bad actors, and Ripple Labs goes out of business. It's unlikely, but let's say that occurs. It's a fair argument to make that, well, this ledger thing and this XRP thing is still going to be running. There's holders all around the world. There's people all around the world. And, one of the core custodians goes down, but the system will still function without us. So that's the assertion that's basically being made here. And they're trying to say, hang on a second here, we're a payment system. And there's some weak arguments. For example, they mentioned that they reached prior settlements with other regulatory bodies in the United States, and those prior settlements clearly articulated Ripple as some form of a currency. And they say, well, hang on a second, how can the government say we're one thing, but then say that we're the other thing? From a moral and political sense, that argument makes a lot of sense. But from a legal argument, it doesn't hold any water. You can be both. Now, number 8 is an interesting claim. It says, Ripple has never offered or sold XRP as an investment. XRP holders do not acquire any claim to the assets of Ripple. Okay. However, there was $1.3 billion worth of divestment and strategic distribution as part of their growth model. And really, the crux of this comes down to this concept of information asymmetry. So the FOIA request that they submitted to the SEC actually specifically mentions a whole bunch of people, including me. If you go to Let's see here, which page? Should do these videos with my glasses on. Here we go. Yeah, page number 4. It says all communications with the Ethereum Foundation and other relevant companies or individuals in the ecosystem, not limited to Vitalik Buterin, Anthony Diorio, Charles Hoskinson, Mihai Amir, Joe, and Gavin. And they probably have Jeff in there too. Yeah, they got Jeff. Okay, so they read the books. Good for them. So first off, they're not going to find anything requesting communications between the SEC and me in this matter because we've never spoken. They never reached out to me. So your FOIA will return back, if successful, an empty file for me. But certainly there probably were communications between Vitalik, Joe, Ethereum Foundation, and the SEC at some arbitrary point in its history. But basically the crux of this is that information asymmetries are what the SEC is really harking at. And some determination was made at the commission that Ethereum was in a position that there were no meaningful information asymmetries between the custodial actors like the foundation and the dApps and other people. That, in other words, there was no privilege in what was going to happen, where were things going to go. The ecosystem was sufficiently decentralized. With XRP and Ripple, I would argue that that's not entirely the case. The reality is there's over 3,000 applications that are deployed on Ethereum. And at the moment, those applications and the many different entities are the value drivers of Ethereum, not the Ethereum Foundation. It's extremely difficult to argue that if Ripple, the custodial company, was to disappear overnight, that there are equivalent actors or other value drivers for the protocol and system. The system is highly reliant on Ripple, the company, and highly reliant on Ripple, the company, continuing to do things to grow and evolve. And they are in a position of privileged information. And they know when things are happening and the ecosystem does not know. Nobody has to go through Vitalik and tell him stuff on a regular basis in order to get permission to do something in the Ethereum ecosystem. So there are thousands of independent announcements that will affect the price of Ether positively or negatively made every single year in that ecosystem. And so they try to liken themselves in paragraph 10 to oil. They say, for example, Ripple holds a large percentage of XRP, but that does not and cannot render it an investment contract. Well, that's a fair point in a general sense. And they cite Exxon holding a large amount of oil, or De Beers holding a large quantity of diamonds, and Bitmain and Chinese miners holding a large amount of Bitcoin. Okay. But that's not necessarily a fair argument when you actually start analyzing, going deep about it. The problem that the SEC seems to have, reading their complaint and going through the prior statements that they've made, especially when they were examining Bitcoin and Ethereum, was that it's a problem when you both hold a large amount of the asset and you enjoy a privileged position of information in the ecosystem, because you can use that privileged position to strategically divest your large positions. This is the whole point of insider trading laws, and this is the whole point of consumer protection. The SEC was literally created to protect the retail investors. That was their mandate from 1933 on. And because where did they come from? They came from rampant predatory speculation in the 1920s. So that mandate they've had for over 80 years, and they take very seriously. And when you look at Ethereum as an ecosystem, or Bitcoin as an ecosystem, Blockstream and the Ethereum Foundation and other custodial entities are not informed about the vast majority of commercial surprises and events that occur. So whatever privilege information they have internally, that is not enough for them to actually get a good idea of the direction of the market. And so that is that's a very big difference, I would say, in the analysis of Ethereum than in the analysis of Ripple. Now, they can counter-argue that, but then I'd say, okay, well, what are the top 10 or 20 dApps in the XRP ecosystem that are distinctly different from your company, your custodial company? Can you point to those? And they actually didn't encourage the development of a DApp ecosystem. They didn't encourage people to list currencies in XRP, independent currencies. There was no ICO movement in Ripple, even though there could have been one. They didn't encourage people to write smart contracts in Ripple. There was a great product called Codius. It never got off the ground. It would have actually probably front-run Ethereum, and the entire DeFi revolution could have been run on XRP. But they didn't really do that much there. And had they, I guarantee you that it would have been actually in this counterfiling of all these other people, and they would have been able to get very close to the information asymmetry argument that's occurred. Okay, so it goes on and on and on and on and on. And there are a few things here that I think are just blatantly unfair. And I think there are some things that are extremely fair, and they raise broader policy questions. One thing that's blatantly unfair is saying, well, Bitcoin and Ethereum are totally controlled by the Chinese government. Go fuck yourself. That's asinine, absolutely asinine. That's not a concern. Yes, the centralization of mining power in places like China and the supply chain of ASICs in China is indeed a problem from an egalitarian mining viewpoint, but by no means is the protocol beholden to that particular government. And that's a pathetic argument to make. Yeah, don't even make it. It's beneath, and it's just completely political. And no judge in the world is going to pay any attention to that. So you're not going to get any brownie points from a legal sense, but you can whine and complain to the regulator about it. However, there is something that I absolutely agree is a very fair argument. So they said the way that the Securities Exchange Commission went about this, where the complaint the SEC filed kind of pretended like they just showed up out of the blue and started having a conversation with Ripple, and they're now here on a white horse to save people. They very fairly point out that the SEC had been talking to Ripple for over 2.5 years. 2.5 years of dialogue back and forth, knowing full well that Ripple was divesting. So if they had the opinion that it's always been a security and this should stop, then why didn't they intervene when they first started talking to them 2.5 years ago? Why now, in the 8 years later, and giving them an opportunity to continue harming investors for 2.5 years? Why didn't they file some form of injunction or try to stop them right at the beginning of the investigation? Why did they wait for continued divestment operations and growth of the business? And so that's an incredibly fair point from a regulatory view. It's unfair for a regulator to watch you for 8 years and then decide arbitrarily somewhere during that period that your conduct was problematic for that entire 8 years after they've been engaged in dialogues with you for 2.5 years. I think the issue here is the wrong regulator is going after Ripple. The concern I think they have is they just think it's profoundly distasteful that Chris and Brad sold $600 million worth of XRP and gave it to themselves. And honestly, it should be the CFTC, in my view, that's going after XRP. There is an ecosystem there. It is actually decentralized. There are probably more than 1 million people who hold XRP, and it is, in a sense, infrastructure that actually has use and utility. We can argue whether that use and utility is competitive or valuable, but billions of dollars of value are transacted on a weekly basis in this ecosystem, and people are clearly using it as a currency in certain cases. And it's a pretty good one when you compare it to fiat currencies. I mean, if wire transfers worked on the Ripple protocol, we would all instantly have money, and we'd have a lot more security than what the existing system has. Okay, the problem is that by saying it's a security to go after Chris and Brad, it feels like an overreach, and it feels like an uncomfortable analysis of this whole emerging information asymmetry, sufficiently decentralized, hidden fourth pillar of the Howey test that's starting to be built. And it's counterproductive to our industry. It's counterproductive to what the SEC has been trying to do, letting a nascent industry define itself and grow by applying such a heavy hammer in this particular case. Also, it's inexcusable to have a lack of interagency cooperation and coordination. The FinCEN, CFTC, and the SEC have to talk to each other and have a joint viewpoint on how to handle enforcement. And you can't have some regulatory bodies come in and say, hey, we're going to treat it this way, and then another regulatory body come in and say, hey, we're going to treat it this way. Or else what you're doing is telling American entrepreneurs, well, guys, you're going to be both a commodity and a security and a currency, and we're going to regulate you in every single way. So you're going to have to be a money transmitter and apply to these commodity regulations and apply to these security regulations all at the same time. And your competitors, maybe we're not going to hold them to any standards or any regulation or anything like that. So I can understand the frustration there. And I can also understand the frustration of, we're going to talk to you for 2.5 years after you did something 8 years ago. And then after the entire process, right before the administration changes, we're going to file something and pretend like we weren't talking to you for 2.5 years and say that everybody's blindsided by this sale of XRP, which we all knew was occurring, actually a public and a private sense, for 2.5 years since the investigation began. So it's a really interesting case. I think it's a pretty strong counterfiling, although it has a lot of political flair in it. And I believe it's gotten to a point where this is no longer just a normal enforcement action. There's going to inevitably, because of lobbying, going to be political actors getting involved, senators, congressmen, perhaps the White House itself. The new chairman, Gensler, is probably going to have a lot to say and think about this. And it's going to be really interesting. And at the end of the day, I think this could have been handled very differently. $1.3 billion is what they're talking about. They've already caused $15 billion worth of damage. It's a Team America event. It's a bad deal. And I think that it's counterproductive for the whole industry to do these types of things. In a perfect world, in my view, the CFTC should have went after Chris and Brad and said, okay, well, we're going to say it's a commodity, and we're going to say you guys are a cartel, and you control a majority of the supply of the commodity, and you're doing things to manipulate the price of that commodity. And there are very strong regulations and laws, and there's a reason why De Beers doesn't operate within the United States. If their company and the totality of all their business conduct was dragged into the U.S., almost certainly U.S. regulators would have serious problems with the way that they do certain things. So they operate outside of that jurisdiction, and for good reason. Dragging this into securities laws is extremely problematic for the industry. What they probably should have done is forced the issue, negotiated with Ripple Labs to further separate the custodianship of XRP and force the further decentralization of XRP and make Ripple spend money to facilitate that through a development trust and other such things, and correct the information asymmetry problems and get Brad and Chris to agree to pay some form of a fine and move on. It's obviously the case that they just wanted to make this a big thing. So I'm dragged into it now, the FOIA letter. In practice, they'll just get an empty file on me, and they'll get some stuff from the other people, assuming the request goes through. And I guess we see the legal strategy now. One pillar is the other regulators and global and Americans say it's not a security. The next pillar is China and Bitcoin. China controls Bitcoin and Ethereum, and this is harmful to American competitiveness if you go after us. Another pillar is the SEC is doing more harm than good by going after us, and they can actually quantify that by the market depreciation. Another pillar is that the SEC had ample time to intervene, and they intervened in a super political, inconvenient way that is not really becoming of a regulator. And another pillar is that the SEC has to put up or shut up. They can't say one ecosystem like Ethereum is sufficiently decentralized, and so we're going to give it a security pass. And then an ecosystem like Ripple is not sufficiently decentralized. They actually have to provide deeper clarity for that, or else they're unequally enforcing the law on different parties. Now, if you go into the rest of it, there's a very detailed point-by-point Howey analysis. And, whatever, there's a lot of this stuff, and it's boilerplate and legalese, and this is just the beginning. I don't think the rebuttal is strong enough for a dismissal. And I think what's going to end up happening is that it will go to trial. And I guess there's a request for a jury trial, so we'll see. But all things considered, it's going to be a long haul. It's probably going to be years before this gets fully resolved, and it's going to continue to escalate and get political. It's very clear that Ripple is well prepared to fight the SEC, and this is going to be a big lawsuit. And I think that it's going to end up in a situation where we get regulatory clarity. At the very least, we're going to get clarity on what constitutes sufficiently decentralized, being defined through the lens of information asymmetries. We're going to get also a lot more clarity on best practices for enforcement. Regardless of how you feel about this, I think it is a bad deal when a regulator intervenes and it harms retail investors, and a regulator intervenes and it harms after they've talked to somebody for 2.5 years. Either shit or get off the pot. And it's not reasonable to just let something drag out, especially when you're concerned about the behavior. If you have legitimate concerns that an unregistered security is being dumped on retail investors, why would you let the firm continue doing that for 2.5 years when you have the ability to stop them as an American company? It makes no sense, and that can't continue in this industry. It also brings a broader meta question about unification of regulation. The American regulatory system is not competitive if you have 5 or 10 or 15 different agencies have 5 or 10 or 15 different opinions, and you can fully comply with one and then somehow be treated as a criminal for the other. That makes no sense at all. And this case demonstrates that in a profound way. There was every opportunity in 2015, when the other members of the Treasury Department were looking into Ripple, for the SEC to come in and hold an opinion about this. For whatever reason, they passed on that, and they should have gotten involved. And that was absolutely the time to bring a lawsuit like this, and it probably would have been significantly more effective. In a perfect world, as I said, it would have been much easier to negotiate a spinning out of the Ripple protocol to kind of kick it to a sufficiently decentralized state, and then let it exist. They seem to offer that courtesy to Block One when they gave them a $24 million fine for their ERC20 offering without harming the investors of the EOS protocol. They allowed that to exist independently of the organization. And I'd argue that was a much more egregious offering than anything XRP has done. So, not very much clarity, kind of fun to indirectly be dragged into it. And we'll see what happens. It's going to be a fun case to follow. I hope this helps you guys with some clarity in the matter. It's a good read. It's on Coindesk.com. Ripple responds to SEC lawsuit over XRP sales, and they also give a link to the FOIA request in the article. And so let me know what you guys think. Cheers.